You're listening to the Primary Care PT podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Obright, and we're going to talk all things primary care PT. Stay tuned and subscribe. Okay, hello everybody. This is Dr. Katie Obright of the Primary Care PT podcast. Today I have a special guest, Dr. Barney, who actually I met originally at Combined Sections meeting this year. And then he came to one of my courses in Chicago, which is awesome. So he is a physical therapist working in Cincinnati. And today we're going to talk a little bit about cardiovascular health and risk in the elite athlete or more athletic population. And then we're going to segue and transition and talk a little bit more about our mutual interest of trying to help get better access to care for patients in underserved communities or with more financial need. My special interest is helping get physical therapists who are in rural, like middle of nowhere, get better access to care. And I know Brian has more of an interest in getting people who are in more urban communities better access to PT care and services. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so go ahead and just tell everybody a little bit about you, what you're currently doing, and then where you see you and your business going in the future.
All right. So, as Katie said, my name is Brian. I'm a physical therapist, live in Cincinnati. Um, I am also a runner. So that's been a big part of my life. Been running since I was 10 years old. And now I coach track and coach at Mason High School. It's a suburban high school in the Cincinnati area. Coach track and cross country at the high school for the boys, as well as, like Katie said, I'm a physical therapist. I work primarily in home health, but I also have my own business called Surmount Physical Therapy and Performance, in which I treat active people all across the lifespan, from older adults to youth. And so, really, my goal heading forward is to solve the problem of how do we provide better access to care for people in urban communities. So I'm African American, I'm Black, so particularly the Black community, as you know, we know that the Black community is generally underserved by physical therapy, but just health services in general. How do we provide access to those people? But also from my end, I have two young kids, I have to make a living. And so how do we provide better access to care to those people while also making it a viable and profitable business is really the problem that I'm hoping to solve moving forward into the future.
Yeah, I think that a lot of physical therapists who are interested in opening their own businesses for whatever reason, for whatever their case may be. For me, it was definitely I wanted to break free of the being told what to do either by my employer, like this is the model of care you should see your
Mhm,
patients 3 times a week, blah blah blah, like some
mhm,
ridiculous stuff that just didn't align with the way that I do things as a physical therapist. So a lot of it was that, but a lot of it was also, I want to make sure that I have the amount of time that I can spend with my patients. I want to be able to do the right thing. But what I found was when I opened my practice in Pittsburgh, which was really like right at the beginning of the pandemic, great timing. I just found that the vast majority of the clients I was working with in a cash market were pretty well off. They were fairly wealthy. They had
mhm.
expendable income, which you kind of expect that, I guess, a little bit when you open up a cash practice. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to work with regular, like average people are most of the world. And when we talk about average, most people's earnings are fairly low and fairly limited, and their insurance plans may or may not cover physical therapy services. So I had a real problem with that.
Mhm.
And I think that there are certainly ways that we can work in a cash market, but while also serving individuals that have limited financial means or limited access to care from a transportation perspective or whatever resources there are. So let's talk about that first. Let's talk about
Sure.
how you think it might be or how, like, what's your strategy to be able to do that? And then I'll tell you mine.
Okay. I'm really in the very beginning stages of this where it's just more so an idea in my mind and less and I've talked to a couple of people, obviously you being one of those people, um, and less of a fully fleshed out plan because it's sort of a pivot for me, just like you mentioned, when you started your cash practice, you anticipated working with mostly people who had the money to spend. Now, whether those people are wealthy or make a lot of money or not, it just depends on how people spend their money. But we know that most Americans don't have what is it like $500, $1,000 for an emergency expense, and so to me that says that most people do not consider physical therapy an emergency expense. And if they're in pain, unless it's something that's really affecting their lives, they're probably not going to seek out the care that they could benefit from. And so, for me, how do I go about solving that problem? I certainly think technology is going to be a part of it. And I don't know how to make an app or anything like that, but I've started using apps even with some of my older patients that I see with the home exercise program, something that they can look at on their phone. Now, getting them to figure out how to work their phone is another challenge. That's its own problem. But certainly, I think technology is going to be a part of it. And honestly, as I've thought about it, I've kind of gone back and forth with the ideas like, should I transition, a business which is an LLC right now to being more of a nonprofit and find ways around the medical system, which can really present barriers for people, especially in terms of cost and what people will pay for. And you mentioned employers telling you, what you can and can't do because that's what's going to make the most money. But it also that comes even higher up from like the payers, whether that's federal payers or whether that's third party payers of like, okay, what are they going to pay for? And is this actually what the person needs? And is this actually what's best for them? And so finding ways to have the most freedom to give the patients what they need, either inside of that system or outside of that system. And I haven't really decided on that yet, to be completely honest with you. But it is something that I'm considering and need to do more research about because my goal is just to give people the best care possible, and that might look like, I think, in many situations, right? We have these diseases. A lot of the diseases and things that we're paying for in a healthcare system are management of chronic diseases. Um, which has a lot to do with lifestyle. And when you talk about lifestyle, you talk about behaviors and stresses on the behaviors and the complexity of us as humans and our society as a whole and the policies and a whole bunch of different things. And so, really thinking, okay, for me as an individual person right now who, is hoping to be working for myself full time, how do I best help these people?
Mhm.
And so that's the question, and I'd be lying if I said I had an answer to it. Um, but that really is the question that I'm trying to answer. And I know you and I talked at your course, and I was mentioning how even just thinking about it can be overwhelming. And if I'm being completely honest, there has been times even over the past couple months where I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, my wife works full time as well. She carries insurance, things like that. So, like, I'm like, what realistically do I have time to even attempt to begin to tackle this problem?
Mhm.
But honestly, the more that I've thought about it, recently in the last couple of weeks, it's like I got to do something different.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
because while I'm grateful for my home health job that I have right now, and certainly while I'm out there, I can do whatever I want, in quotations for those people who are listening on audio. For these patients, there are some limitations.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
there's always going to be
Okay.
limitations, but I'd rather set the limitations or have to finagle that on my own than have them set by somebody else.
100%. So you mentioned a couple of things, and I actually think we we could probably brainstorm and problem solve some ways to tackle these things.
Hmm.
The thing is like the sky's the limit. And if you have appropriate resources and you have people who are passionate about doing the right things, which I think you absolutely do, and I know that I do. My bottom line, I always have had a very like altruistic mindset, and I want to do right by my community and by, you know, helping others and making the world a better place. I know that a lot of people, so my husband's in international business, and in
Hmm.
the business world, especially when we talk about like I promise I won't get off on a tangent here, but when we talk about like healthcare services being taken over by
Hmm.
private equity, like their bottom line is just to turn a profit. It is not about quality of care. It is not about providing a good service. It is not about treating employees right. No matter what they say, private equity is about profit. So when we flip that and we make the people who are really dedicated to and have an altruistic mission and a mission to do right by their communities, and we think about this concept of going nonprofit, then I'm like, okay, there's a million things we could do here. So nonprofits, compared to LLCs, compared to S corps, a nonprofit, if you're a 501(c)(3), you can fundraise. Okay, so
Hmm.
you can actually have, you know, you set a mission, you have a board, you file for a nonprofit status, and then you can file for 501(c)(3) tax exemption, number one, which is helpful for purchasing equipment and that kind of stuff that you need to run your service. But then you also get the advantage of, hey, we can do all of these different fundraisers in order to fund our mission. And your
Right.
mission could be such that you're basically fundraising to make sure that you can pay the therapists and pay the salaries of the people who are rendering the services, pay for equipment, pay for, you know, if it's a mobile service, like vehicle expenses, that kind of stuff. But at the
Hmm.
end of the day, at the end of any day or year, you end up not making a profit. So there are so many really convoluted processes that take place in some of the humongous nonprofits,
Hmm.
healthcare institutions, namely. But I think that if
Right.
you keep things small, you could do this really well if you play your cards right. And I think the nonprofit is definitely the way to go with that. And I am like, I would actually be interested in like talking more offline with you about how we could potentially work together and maybe even bring in some other people into this
Hmm.
to make it a sustainable future that is, you know, run and led by physical therapists and other healthcare clinicians. So
Yeah.
just thoughts on that. I know that's like
Yeah.
probably
You're really talking
overextending,
here.
but
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think on an individual level, right? Like I said, I'm just trying to find a way to provide a living for my family that um, aligns with my values and serves the people that I want to serve, which is, in many senses, are those who often get overlooked, either intentionally or unintentionally. So yeah, I definitely think that that is good. And I think there are a lot of physical therapists who want to do that. Um, but your work, it's a lot of I guess what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know if it's inertia or momentum. I'm not a physics major, but like going against you with that, or I guess you're always fighting gravity, uh, in a sense with that because there's just a system, at least in the outpatient world, but I would argue in a lot of places in physical therapy, where it is what it is,
uh-huh.
and it is slowly changing. But the good thing is that you can do something different if you so
Yeah.
choose. You just have to be willing to take risk, calculated
And I
risk.
think that that's something that a lot of people have trouble with, or that they're not willing to do, or they simply just don't have the means to do it. Like, for example,
Hmm.
you and I are actually in really similar situations where we have a spouse that carries benefits. It allows like a little bit of a layer of security for us
Hmm.
to kind of wiggle around and figure out what it is that we really want to make happen. And excuse me, but a lot of people don't have that have that protection. And the ones who sort of break free are they're really taking a big financial and, maybe safety risk. So so I definitely think there's a layer of it there. That is just a challenge. But just to come back to types of entities,
Mhm,
another model that I have heard of is, you have an LLC, you have like a for-profit standard typical business,
mhm,
and you see patients for a fee for service rate or a package rate or a membership or whatever it is, but you don't,
mhm,
don't bill out to insurance. And or you have a hybrid where maybe you're in network with certain insurances but not others, depending on, what's worth it to you and how well they treat their providers, which we know a lot of insurance companies don't treat their providers well. But so maybe you're in network with some, not with others.
mhm,
But then you also use this self-pay model. But then some of the money that you garner, like a percentage of the funds that you get from your paying
mhm,
individuals, you then can award to almost like a scholarship or like I'm forgetting what the word is, but like a free episode of care for somebody who really needs it, who does not have the financial means to pay.
mhm.
Um, so I know for a fact, and I'll just I was gonna say name call, but that's not. I'll give a shout out to
Shout out, yeah.
Brian Shelton, who's doing this in I think Lexington, Kentucky. But he has
Winchester, well, Winchester's close to Lexington, so close enough.
okay, yeah. So you're aware of his model, and I'll
Hmm.
probably tag him in here so maybe he can speak to his things a little bit better. But I know that there is a model of care like that. So what are your thoughts on that as opposed to going the nonprofit route?
Yeah, I've considered that as well. That's, another way of doing it where, one, obviously with the 501(c)(3), you literally can go out and fundraise and, get grants, all these other different things, which of course comes with its own set of challenges. Well, on the other side, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna charge a premium for my services, for those that can't afford it, and then use the excess or extra, to pay for those who maybe can only pay a percentage of it or maybe can't pay for it at all. I think, both of those are good options. Um, like I said, I haven't quite made a decision on which one would be better for me in particular, mostly because I am a little less knowledgeable on the 501(c)(3) process and all that goes into that. But I definitely think it's a good model. Referring to Ryan, I was listening to his talk that he did. I think it's at the San Diego Pain Summit, um, and he talked about his model of care and what he does. And even that, since I had a conversation with him maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. And even since then, what he's doing has shifted a little bit. So initially, from my understanding, he was doing, okay, here's the out of network rate. If you have third party insurance, this is the rate, right? If you can't afford to pay it, then we'll do a sliding scale. And then if you, absolutely can't afford to pay it at all, then, we'll cover it, was what he was doing. And now I believe, is in network with most insurances, and it's just finding creative ways to do things with people so that obviously they can get the reimbursement they need to continue, so he can continue to pay his staff and pay himself. And in addition to that, I believe he's also working on, getting his 501(c)(3) so that he can do more of his community work. I think he works pretty closely with the homeless, or the houseless population, in Winchester and probably just in the Lexington area in general. So he's doing a couple different things. Obviously, he's a lot further along the process than I am. But yeah, there's different ways to go about doing
Well, perhaps we need to reach out to Ryan and see if we can
it.
form some sort of co-op. I mean, because basically the model that he's doing is something that you and I and probably dozens or hundreds of other physical therapists are interested in doing. So we all need to like sort of join forces. I'm always of the mind of like, don't reinvent the wheel, kind of
Hmm.
work smarter, not harder. So, um, So Ryan, we're talking about you, but you're not here. I'm sorry. We're obviously huge fans of what you're doing and what you've created, and want to figure out a way to model that or work together. So maybe there'll be a future episode and I'll reach out to him. That'd be cool. Um, so another thing you had mentioned is how we can utilize technology and digital resources um, in order to improve our ability to render services without expansive or without increasing cost. So when we look at running a business, you have your expenses and then you have your revenue,
Hmm.
and revenue minus expenses equals your profit. So
Hmm.
you have to have expenses for a lot of like traditional healthcare services, brick and mortar. A lot of it is your site, like the rental space that you lease, perhaps equipment that you may or may not lease or utilize if you have a vehicle to fund or whatever it is. But a lot of it is going to be that space. And some of it is a lot of it is also your time, the amount of time that you're able to spend with a certain patient. So if you are working under a model of care where you're sort of saying that every patient needs to be seen twice a week, for which that cookie cutter prescription is so like, let's stop that, because it's, first of all, not appropriate, and then second of all, it just doesn't even make sense. But
Hmm.
if so so when we're talking about utilizing digital resources, like for me, the things that come to mind are doing like video visits. So, using your doxy.me or whatever like HIPAA
Hmm.
compliant um digital visit you can use. So I'm sitting here in my home office, which actually, if I just face the camera slightly that way, you would also see my entire bedroom and my dog behind me. So this is my office. This is where I work every day. And
Hmm.
I don't have, and downstairs, I have a clinic that folds up into the wall, and I see and treat patients here. I have a permit, I have all the things. But I have like a community clinic and I have really zero overhead. Part of my overhead is really just our home mortgage. So my insurance, my stuff like that, I have all of that. But I don't have a separate lease where I'm paying, and I'm in the Chicago area, so where I'm paying $3,000 a month or more,
Hmm.
or maybe slightly less, to fund that. So, what would be your vision of how you could utilize digital resources in order to meet patients' needs without increasing too much cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'll tell you what I currently do, like in terms of space, right? So, I rent space out of a gym, and I really don't do that very often at this point because the patients that I'm working with live closer to my house than the gym is. So I just drive to their house because I'd have to drive longer to get to the gym to work with them. So in certain situations, I do need the gym. Like I'll need the treadmill to do a treadmill analysis with the runner or something like that. But a lot of times I'll just go into the patient's house. And obviously, like I said, I work in home health, so I'm used to the driving part of it. But that's kind of in some ways inefficient, especially depending on how often you're going. So what I do with one of my patients, I'll give you an example. So with one of them, she's um, in her 50s, has had multiple surgeries on the same ankle for tearing some tendons, and so I'm just working on with her for rehab after another one of her surgeries. Hopefully, this is the last one, right? Um, for her, I started, with going, I can say fairly frequently. So let's say once a week. But honestly, a lot of it is just her working on the exercises, getting more used to walking, building up her walking tolerance. So I really don't feel a need to go there very often. And I can, again, use an app to send her, you know, exercises for her to work on with progressions in there and say, okay, when this gets easy, do this, and then progress to this, and then progress to that, and keep working on that. And then obviously she's just going to go about living her everyday life. I have another person. She is older, so she's in her 80s, and so uh, originally I was trying to taper off her sessions more because well, Medicare, you can't just keep seeing people forever. I mean, you
Mhm.
could, but the chances of them reimburse you for it go down. So, but recently I started seeing her more again because she really needed it, and she's doing pretty well with it because just because of her life and family situation, she doesn't have much help to help her do the exercises. So I do think it depends on the individual patient and their needs, but certainly I think video visits, can be helpful. I haven't done much of that in my own personal business. Usually people come to see me, or like I said, I'm going to their house. But I even think use of video and me shooting my own videos and explaining, okay, this is how I want you to do this exercise and this is how you progress it, and all these sort of things can certainly help. And then just texting people, have a dedicated business line. And so just text people to see how things are going, um, using platforms where they can provide their own feedback, I
Mhm.
think are great ways to help people move along without them having to take time out of their day to come there, and it ends up costing them more money and costing me more of my time.
Yes. Okay, totally. So I just presented recently on the primary physical health model of care, which is something that after researching a lot of a variety of different healthcare models, there are so many options for physical therapists to make sure that they're meeting the patient's needs appropriately. And that does not necessarily always have to be a face-to-face visit. And a lot of times, sometimes patients just have quick questions. And I know when I was working with my direct primary care physician in Pittsburgh, she was my personal physician. It was the first time I was able to send a text message to my physician and within 24 hours, just get a reply that way directly from my physician. And
Hmm.
wouldn't that, and I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, great. Like this is 100% something that I want to offer to my patients too, because
Hmm.
they don't need to schedule an appointment just for me to answer a simple question. And maybe they give me a little bit of a longer text to explain context of the situation. That gives me an opportunity to triage and to determine like, hey, this might be something I really want to see you in person for, or hey, let's set up a video visit, or hey, don't worry about that. That's expected. Come see me again in a couple of weeks. So I actually really love that method, and it takes the layer of limited of bad access where you have to call and then you sit on the waiting line and then they like force you to make an appointment just to be able to talk to your doctor. And there are ways to build that service, that additional, like, hey, you can text me at any time and I
Hmm.
will get back to you within business hours, set your barriers. Um,
Hmm.
you can build that into a membership model. Like, hey, people
Right.
pay this much money for a gym membership.
Hmm.
Pay this when in your time of need, or maybe just indefinitely, in your time of need, in dealing with this problem or in trying to improve your health or performance, you can pay this amount of money per month and you can text me and we can work together that way. Email me and I will make sure that you get the stuff that you need. Like, why is that not just mainstream?
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, I'm sure well, maybe you haven't worked in too many clinics like this, just because I know a little bit about your, work background and all of that, where I'd be wondering, well, I wonder how this person is doing, or like I think it would really be helpful if I could text this person, email
Mhm.
them, so on and so forth. And it's just not,
It's
not
not
really possible.
feasible. I know it's not
Yes, it's
like
not
they
feasible. Yeah.
don't make it a reality, or they don't make it realistic to be able to do that when in reality the patients that I manage, the patients that I was managing 2 years ago, I think about them and I wonder about them. And like the patients that I have seen within the past year, I actually have a routine where, depending on the type of patient or depending on what their needs were, once a month or quarterly, I'm texting them to check in to see how they're doing. And that's not a way for me to
Hmm.
make sure that they come back to me because I want their money more. That's really me just reaching out to make sure that they're still doing well. And it's also an accountability check too, because we all know that patients, when they quote unquote graduate from physical therapy, which should never be a thing, it should always be a sustained relationship, in my opinion. But we all know that like when they're done with the 12 weeks that are prescribed or that
Hmm.
insurance cover, and we hope they never come back to us, we all know that they generally fall off with their exercise routine. So if we
Hmm.
have the ability to check in with them on a quarterly basis, even just to say, hey, how are things going? That
Hmm.
triggers something in their brain to be like, oh, I probably need to start doing my exercise again. Or, hey, I had this question.
Hmm.
Let me ask that question at this time. So I think it's like such an invaluable thing for access, um, to be able to offer those just as a model, even if you're not working with patients face to face, just having an open lines of communication, but also making sure that you have a fee structure or a membership model in place where you are getting paid for your time. But it's affordable for patients to do. So I think that's great.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think it's one of the ways to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Brian, I think there's so many ways that we could like continue working together. So we'll continue to talk offline. But I also, before we wrap up this segment, I want you to speak to how important it is for, well, first of all, what the issues with access to care are for the primarily Black community or the urban community that you are interested in serving. Because
Hmm.
as a white female who was raised in a predominantly white, not wealthy, but predominantly white community outside of
Hmm.
Buffalo, these are things that I have only come to learn and appreciate and understand a little bit better over the past few years as things like diversity, equity, and inclusion has come up. Um, I am so acutely aware at this point now of the way that I was raised and my lack of understanding and my lack of knowledge of how other people of other ethnicities are truly underserved and intentionally or unintentionally treated differently than me. So I would love for you to be able to speak to that for people like me, for people who just don't have a good understanding. And also, so speaking to that, but then also speaking to the importance of diversity within the healthcare community itself.
Hmm.
Like there's not that many Black physical therapists. There's not that many Black physicians. So I want you to just talk about those things because I think they're really important topics.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So, just to give you a little bit of my background, I grew up in actually the Chicagoland area. I grew up in a suburb called South Holland, Illinois. So it's in the south suburbs. My parents grew up on the south side of Chicago, and moved out to the suburbs to provide a better life for my brother and I. And so, in many ways, I do feel privileged, and now, knowing what I know now, and being a parent, I'd see how much my parents sacrificed, um, so that we could have a good childhood. And so, for me personally, having access to care uh, wasn't an issue. Now, later on in life, I did find out I had a congenital heart abnormality, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I won't get too much into that. But I don't think that was a failure of access to care. It was more so just they weren't really checking for it 30 years ago. But in terms of just the community, I think about um, so like here in Cincinnati, or even when I would drive to my, grandparents' house on the south side of Chicago, like you see things, you can just ride down the same street, whether you're going in my case, south, so towards the city in Cincinnati, or going north into the city to Chicago, you can see just a profound lack of economic opportunity in general. You can see a lot of stuff that was there that is no longer there. And there are some, health care places that are available. But of course, people need to feel like they can afford it to go to it. And I'm sure that is one of the big issues. Men in particular, but even more particularly Black men, um, our lifespan is pretty bad, like compared to average, or compared to white men. Our lifespan is significantly shorter, and a lot of it is due to um, preventable diseases, so not managing, say, your diabetes, not taking your hypertension medication consistently, other lifestyle things that because guys don't regularly go to the doctor, they have they're not getting the care that they need. They're not getting the information that they need, and so literally they can be dying from that, whether it's a stroke or whether it's other complications that come from these lifestyle diseases. So those are the big things that I see. To answer your question about physical therapy as a profession, yeah, I mean it's an issue. There's not a lot of Black people in our profession. There are people who are much more intelligent or much more learned about this and qualified to speak on it. Like I'm thinking of a panel I went to at last year's CSM with Lisa Van Hoos. I
Oh,
know.
Lisa Van Hoos is my hero.
Yeah, so she's the OG. She's like the big name. But there are some other Black women in particular who do a lot of research around this, or they work in academia and are trying to find solutions to the problems. And so, what I took away from their presentation is there's sometimes imagine a pipeline, right? We've all heard of like maybe the school to prison pipeline. So there's this pipeline of all the way from like elementary school to getting some sort of terminal degree, let's say in this case a physical therapy degree, since that's what we're talking about. If there are leaks in the pipeline, those are issues, right? So whether it's people, kids don't know that they can become a physical therapist. They don't know what a physical therapist does. There's not early interaction with it. I could even see the issue. So, like, say here in Cincinnati Public Schools, I think they have an issue with having enough athletic trainers and PTs to treat the athletes, right? Because that's a way a lot of people get into it is they play a sport, they get injured, they go see a PT, right? But if there aren't enough PTs to even work within these schools, that takes away maybe some of that early access. um, Quality of the schools that the students are going to, I think, will be another thing, right? Because then it makes you maybe less competitive as you get into high school trying to get into college, and then we all know how hard it is to get into physical therapy school or really any graduate school for any healthcare discipline. So those are some of the things that I think of. I one other thing I'll mention is, and I didn't experience this when I was in PT school, but I did have Black classmates where it's like people, you could tell, even if they didn't say it out loud or they didn't say it like with their full voice, like they would whisper it, like you can tell some of my um, white classmates felt like some of my other Black classmates didn't really deserve to be there. Um, and that is a stress that I felt secondhand because they liked me for, whatever reason. And they were cool with me. Maybe it's just because of the way I carry myself or whatever. But there are other classmates where they, you know, did not feel that way about them. And I have to wonder if part of the reason that they maybe felt that way, like they didn't, like this person didn't particularly deserve to be there, is because they're Black and all the stuff that goes along with that. People feel like we're not as high academically achieving as other groups, and so that can be an issue as well. So it's multifaceted, and it's I don't have the answers, but um, that as a whole, right? Both on the PT student and being PT side of things, and not being a lot of representation for us, and the lack of access to care. I think those two things intersect with each other because people are generally more comfortable with people of their own culture, even in a healthcare setting, and sometimes get better results. And so, if there is more representation there, that may help people be more willing to get the care that they need.
You're absolutely right. And first of all, I just want to mention that, like, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so that I honestly, I have no words for that, but it exists. And we all have to recognize, no matter what your race, your ethnic background is, your nationality, the language that you speak, we all have to recognize that these even like implicit or explicit biases exist. And for especially as healthcare professionals, it's important for us to understand that, not only for our peers to be able to recognize that they, just because of your race or your ethnic background, there are going to be certain barriers for you that don't exist for me. And that's just the truth. And I hate that. I hate that history or society or culture or whatever has done that. But I want to do everything in my power to make sure that that I can influence the people around me to
Hmm.
understand that, to make sure that I'm talking to my kids about it
Hmm.
appropriately, so that it's not a continued problem for future generations. And I think, or I like to believe that it definitely has, at least. So I'm 9 years out of school, and I think
Hmm.
that for me in school, I don't think we got much training at all on the importance of recognizing cultural and diversity related, cultural, race related differences. um I don't think we got really a whole lot of that much at all, but I really think that a lot of schools are starting to look at
Hmm.
that factor a lot more and just at least expose everybody to that, not only so that we can treat our peers in our profession appropriately, but also so that we can recognize, like you said, that if we have more diversity and representation within our professions, that our patients and our communities are going to see better outcomes. Because I have heard multiple times, and I know that there's research that people who like patients who are Black, or patients who are oh my gosh, what's the word Native American, or patients of various races or ethnic backgrounds, have more of an ability to establish a better therapeutic alliance with people of their own race. And so I feel really strongly that, now, of course, that doesn't change my, if I was seeing a person who was Black or who was Native American or anything, that would not change my ability to, or I hope would not change my ability to form a therapeutic alliance with them.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it is a factor. So I don't know. I definitely see that there is a need for that, and I hope that it is getting better. And I hate to hear stories like what your classmate went through. So I hope that it is improving. Do you think? I mean,
I I graduated and kind of, moved on. So I don't know. I would hope so. I think so. I think so. I think, you know, people have to see the value in it, and of course, there's only so much institutions can do, because when you force people to do something that they don't want to do, especially in America, especially Americans, we don't particularly respond well to that. So that's a challenge, but I can only do what I can do. The vast majority of people that I've treated in the 5 years that I've been out of school don't look like me, and we don't come from similar backgrounds. A lot of them are, I guess, more. I wouldn't say they're quite rural, but some of them have been. But I can still find ways to connect with them, and I think even on the other side, like regardless of whether the person that you're treating, you have much in common with them, what it looks like on paper. I mean, there are ways to connect with people, and I think that's one of the amazing things about what we get to do as PTs. We do get to spend so much time with the patients and their families, and connecting with them. So.
I love to hear that. It all comes back to, we all are human and living the human experience. And understand if you understand the variation in people's backgrounds, whether they come from, the middle of, farm country and have, no access to anything, and maybe they even sound like they speak a different language than you, even though they're speaking English. there are ways to understand those cultural variations and still be able to connect with individuals, regardless of where you come from and where they come from. It's our
Mhm.
responsibility to make sure we understand those so that we can connect with patients, because that's so important to the therapeutic experience. Well,
Mhm.
I love this. This has been a great episode, and I feel like there's so much more follow-up that could come from it. We will continue on in a part 2 episode. Stay tuned for that in just a couple of weeks. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening. If you love our show, go ahead and subscribe to stay tuned for future episodes. As a thank you to our listeners, we're happy to offer $50 off of our Primary Care PT Foundations course or our Musculoskeletal Imaging certification. Visit us at redefinehealthed.com and use code PCPTPodcast, all one word, all lowercase, on the checkout page to claim your discount. That's PCPTPodcast, all one word, all lowercase. Until the next episode, stay awesome, y'all.